All right, hello everyone. So today we have the following problem. It's like a pre-calculus algebra question. We are asked to find the domain of the function f of x equal to the square root of the quantity 2x minus 1 divided by the quantity x plus 4. All right, so you're finding the domains of your functions. What I like to do is I like to see the types of operations we have on our that are presented in our function and the restrictions on those operations. So if you notice, we have a square root there. So a square root, the inside of a square root can only be positive, and in fact that just doesn't work for just square roots, and it's any even index radical, we like to say. So let me just move that fact up here. Okay. And yes, I have written there, the inside of an even index radical has to be non-negative. So okay, again, I notice the square root, and the inside has to be non-negative, which in other words means that. And the index here, by the way, the word index, excuse me, is the number that you see on the radical. So you have 2, 4, 6, 8. That's what I'm saying when even index radical. If this was an odd number up here, so it was like 3, 5, then we have no restrictions, okay? So that's the first restriction that we have. And the second thing that I notice is that, notice how you're dividing by x plus 4. And if you recall, with fractions, you cannot divide by 0. That's a big no-no. So I'm gonna put that write that restriction in here, that I cannot divide by 0. So what does that mean? That means that the bottom cannot equal 0. So the denominator, excuse me, cannot equal 0. So x plus 4 cannot equal 0. So those are our two restrictions that we have. And what I'm going to do is basically I'm going to solve for each of these restrictions. So for the 2x minus 1 greater than or equal to 0, I'm going to give myself a little bit of space first of all. And I'm going to go ahead and move the 1 over and divide by 2. So when you're solving an inequality, it's very similar to solving an equation. We move things over to the other side, we add them or subtract them, and then we divide by the coefficient in front of x. The main difference, though, is in an inequality, when you divide or multiply by a negative, you will change the inequality sign. That didn't happen here, but just to note. Okay, so we have that. And then over here on this other restriction, I'm going to subtract the 4 over. And I have a not equal sign. We treat it as like an equal sign, like if it was an equation. So really no difference. It just says x does not equal negative 4. So those are our restrictions. And now what I want to do is, so technically I found the domain. It's this and this, but we'd like to make it look a little more pretty. Maybe write it in some type of notation, like interval notation, okay? And for that, when you have multiple parts to a domain, what I like to do personally is I like to write them out here. And in our case, I'm gonna make a number line, put negative 4, and then put a half, and then plug 0. So I don't need to write every integer fraction. I just need to know kind of like where they're located at, and maybe include 0, just so 0 is the divide line between positive and negative. And I'm gonna do this for that x greater than or equal to 1/2. It's everything over here, and for the other domain, which is x not equal to negative 4, basically it's every number is included except negative 4. So what's my final answer? Well, my final answer here is what they have in common, and what they have in common, it's the between is greater than or equal to 1/2. Okay, so my domain here is going to be 1/2 to infinity, so I include 1/2 with a bracket, and then comma infinity with a parenthesis around it, and that would be my domain of my function f. Okay, so the big deal here is you look at your original function and you see if you have any restrictions on it. So in this case, we had a radical on it, a square root, and as I said, the inside of an even index radical has to be non-negative, so it's got to be greater than or equal to 0. And we went ahead and we wrote down that restriction, and then we also noticed that we had a fraction, so you cannot divide by 0, and we said x plus 4 cannot equal 0, and then we solved each of these individually for x, just isolated the x, and we wrote each of these restrictions on a line interval. You know, you don't have to do this with the line interval. I just like doing it because I like to visualize what's going on. And the domain is what both those two restrictions have in common, which is including 1/2 to infinity, okay? And yeah, technically that -4 really had no play here, but we still had to look at it in terms of a restriction here, what we could not have, okay? All right, so I hope this helps. Thank you for your time.